Chapter 23 is focusing on the Gilded Age. These are the 3 decades following the Civil War that, according to Mark Twain, is fraught with political, economic, and social corruption. So much like other things are gilded, it has a nice shiny exterior on the outside, but you chip away at the surface and you find a lot of cheap garbage underneath. This is what the Gilded Age is about. It also happens to overlap in some parts Reconstruction, or the bringing back of the United States together after the Civil War. So the first election after the Civil War is in 1868. Obviously, Andrew Johnson is a no-go. He barely escaped being removed from office. So the Republicans focused their attention on U.S. Grant. U.S. Grant had zero political experience prior to this. In fact, he'd only voted for president one time before this, and that was for a Democrat. But what Grant does have going for him is he is a war hero, and people like to vote for war heroes. The major plank of the platform of the Republican Party in 1868 is all about continuing on with military reconstruction. Now, from a political standpoint, this makes sense for the Republicans because the longer they can keep southern states from being fully reunited into the Union, the more the Republicans can control political power. So continuing on with military reconstruction allows them to retain political power on a national level because those solidly Democrat Redeemer governments can't come back into the wave. And the way that the Republicans won in 1868, and in fact how they are going to win in many elections to come during this period of time during the Gilded Age, is by, quote, waving the bloody shirt or waving the bloody flag. This is their campaign strategy to help them win. And basically what it is, and what it's a symbol of, is to remind the American people of how gory the Civil War had been, and to blame the Democrats down in the South for the 600,000 men who were dead as a result of the Civil War. Now, it has its background in the fact that a blood-stained nightshirt of a Republican from the South who had been beaten by a KKK member was waved on the floor of the House. So that's where it starts, but waving the bloody shirt is a strategy, or it's an analogy to these are the guys that started the Civil War, vote for the Republicans. And so the Republicans, as a result, are targeting specific groups of people, Union soldiers, freedmen, etc., and these are the people who overwhelmingly voted for Grant in 1868, and he won the election, obviously. So like I said before, the Gilded Age, everything looks nice and shiny on the outside, but right underneath the surface is a lot of corruption. Economic corruption, political corruption, and social corruption. So let's start with Jim Fisk and Jay Gould. They are two people who are just quintessentially corrupt during this era. There's lots of other guys that we're going to be talking about here in the coming chapters, but Jim Fisk and Jay Gould are those quintessential capitalists during the Gilded Age who are focusing on making a lot of money no matter what. And they make a lot of money by speculating in the Erie Railroad. Now, speculation, if you don't remember, this is when whether it's stocks or housing or land or whatever the commodity is, your goal is to buy low and sell high. So when it comes to the railroad stock, their goal here is to buy up as much railroad stock in the Erie Railroad at a low price and then turn around and sell it later on for a profit, which is exactly what they did. They also made a backroom deal with the Tammany Hall boss, or the political machine boss for New York City, Boss Tweed, to get favorable legislation from the city of New York in exchange for making him director of this railroad. So a little bit of corruption on the local level as well. Now, once they had made their money by speculating in the Erie Railroad, Jim Fisk and Jay Gould went on to try to make money in the gold market. Now, gold, we have a tendency to think of gold as as jewelry or as currency or whatnot, but think about gold here in this perspective as a commodity, something to buy and sell. You know, it's no different than any other commodity. I sell sugar, or I sell computers, or whatever it is. Controlling the gold market or cornering the gold market were Fisk and Gould's plan here, because by controlling the gold market, or cornering the gold market as it's called in economics terms, you are artificially lowering the supply of gold that is available for other people to buy and sell. Therefore, you manipulate the price. So, as we know, with a small supply of anything, the price for that commodity goes up. Fisk and Gould were hoping to buy up as much gold as they can, lower the supply available to the American people, and then sell it off at a crazy high rate. This in and of itself is not illegal. I mean, it might not be great for the economy, but it's not illegal. What is despicable and illegal, for that matter, is the fact that Fisk and Gould paid off Grant's brother-in-law. They paid off the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, or the Assistant Treasurer to the U.S., to give them a tip as to whether or not the United States was going to sell off their shares of gold. So Fisk and Gould, their little plan would only work if the U.S. kept their gold locked up tight in a vault somewhere. The second the American government starts releasing their own gold supply, that would flood the market and would ruin their chances of making any money. So they paid off Grant's brother-in-law, and they paid off the assistant treasurer to the U.S. to give them a tip to let them know, hey, when does the U.S. plan on releasing their gold? And so in the summer of '69, Fisk and Gould began buying up as much gold as they could, and very, very quickly overnight, the price of gold skyrocketed. The U.S. government realized a little too late what was going on, and quickly tried to release $4 million worth of federal gold. However, Fisk and Gould had already knew what was going to happen, and so they had sold off their shares and made a ton of cash. But for everyone else who had been invested in gold, this marked what was one of many Black Fridays. Basically, the bubble burst, and lots of people lost a lot of money because they had been invested in the gold market. So even though Fisk and Gould are relatively minor when it comes to the economics of the day, this is just an example of the types of people that were around during this time and how people were looking to make money, quick and easy money available. Now, when we look at political corruption during the Gilded Age, there is corruption on every single level of the government, from local government to state government all the way up to federal government. So looking at New York City as obviously local government, we have to look at the political machine that was Tammany Hall, headed up by boss William Marcy Tweed. Now, while New York has the most well-known political machine, every major city in the United States was run pretty much this exact same way. So this is just our example of what a political machine is. Now, we've talked about this before. A political machine, this is basically an organization that has a lot of influence in politics of the day. And so in New York City, especially with all the Irish immigrants coming to the United States, they needed a place to live, they needed a job, they needed to be integrated into the community. So they were oftentimes met right off the boat by a representative of Tammany Hall, this political democratic organization. And they would be given a job, they'd be given a place to live, and all Tammany Hall asked in response was that come election day, these immigrants voted the way Tammany Hall wanted them to. There was no secret ballot at the time, so it was very easy to keep track of who was voting for whom. Now, you might wonder, well, who cares about that? So they vote this way or they vote that way. But with elected office comes a lot of power and a lot of money. So Boss Tweed, while he was not an elected official himself, he's more the puppet master pulling the strings, whenever the city of New York needed to build a road or build a new building or build a bridge, you know, different contractors put forward bids on, we can build this bridge or this road the best and for the cheapest. Well, that's not always done, because oftentimes it were the companies that Boss Tweed had invested in, or it were the companies that came and gave Boss Tweed and his cronies a very large bribe. And so this whole system is built on bribery, graft, cronyism, election fraud, etc., so that Boss Tweed and his friends can get filthy rich through bribery. So it might have worked out to some degree for those poor Irish immigrants because they had a place to live and a job, but in the end they would be paying more in taxes because a large amount of money would be going to pay for a terrible construction company or a made-up construction company to build these public works projects. And so most people were ignorant of this, how this worked, except in 1871 the New York Times ran an article about the corruption that was going on in Tammany Hall, that $200 million was being skimmed off the top from the city government. The New York Times had received a tip from a crony of Boss Tweed, and they ran this article, even though Tweed offered the New York Times a $5 million bribe not to run the article. Also at this same time, Thomas Nast, who is a favorite question on the AP exam, he is the world's most famous political cartoonist of the day. He worked for Harper's Weekly and week after week after week published political cartoons depicting how corrupt Boss Tweed and his friends were. Now, from Tweed's perspective, his constituents couldn't read. They were mostly illiterate immigrants, so that didn't matter. But these political cartoons were easy to understand for the people of the day. And so from Tweed's perspective, this did the most damage to him. In 1871, Tweed was arrested, prosecuted, and convicted by Samuel J. Tilden. And he'll be important later because he will run for president. Here's a picture depicting Boss Tweed by Thomas Nast. He's so greedy and gluttonous that he's eaten up everyone. And at the bottom, if you can't see that, it says, "What are you laughing at? To the victor go the spoils." So this is once again referring to that spoil system or the patronage system or cronyism, that I'm the one who is in charge of politics. I therefore get to make the rules and make all of the money off of the system. Here's another political cartoon depicting Tweed as larger than life. Even law enforcement can't touch him. All right, so let's take a look in 1872 of the election of 1872 between the Republicans, who once again nominated U.S. Grant, even though he faced a lot of corruption within his administration, namely the Credit Mobilier scandal in 1872 and the Whiskey Ring scandal in 1874 and 75. So a group of reformers, angry at Grant and all of the craziness that was going on, left the Republican Party to form a new third political party, the Liberal Republicans, in 1872. And their goal was on reform. They're sick of Grant, and they're sick of the corruption circulating throughout his administration. And their goal was to, quote, turn the rascals out. The Liberal Republicans nominated the editor of the New York Tribune, Horace Greeley. Now, Horace Greeley had never really held a political office. He's not really a campaigner, so that's going to come back to haunt him in the end. The Democrats, anxious to win an election, no matter what, they really could care less who the candidate is. They just want to get in on this action, also backed Horace Greeley too. So he is actually nominated by two different political parties at this time. Grant, on the other side, was obviously nominated for the Republicans. And this election, much like other ones that we've seen in the past, is all about mudslinging. Grant was called a drunk. Horace Greeley was called a communist and a free love advocate, which is just a fancy way of saying a hippie in the 1870s. And not much was actually discussed about changing the system. But because the Liberal Republicans were nipping on the Republicans' heels, the Republicans were forced to pass some minor reforms to get them off their backs, namely a general amnesty or a blanket pardon to Confederates at this time, or to reduce some of that extremely high tariff. So in the end, Greeley lost, but he did help to bring about some minor reforms on the part of the Republicans. And here is Horace Greeley. Now, Grant's second term in office is going to be plagued by economic problems, particularly the Panic of 1873. This is a downturn or a depression in the economy when the largest investing firm, banking firm in the United States, Jay Cooke and Company, went bankrupt. Jay Cooke and Company had been way too free with their investments, over speculating in companies that weren't actually that sound. And so because they had overextended themselves, in 1873 they went bankrupt. Now, that's fine and good for Jay Cooke and Company, but they are so large and so important to the economy that this started this domino effect of falling down. So all of the people, obviously, that worked for Jay Cooke and Company went or lost their jobs. Also, all of those companies that Jay Cooke and Company had invested in lost their jobs because obviously that money was pulled out. So this creates that domino effect that starts getting faster and faster and faster. to the point where the New York Stock Exchange had to close for 10 days in order to stop the bleeding that was going on. Massive amounts of unemployment, bankruptcies all over the United States, and banks started to close. Now, here's the issue with banks at this time. You might not have invested in the stock market, but obviously you probably had your money in a bank. If a rumor started to circulate that your bank was in trouble, what most normal people would do would run on the bank, as it was called, and demand all of your money back. Well, if everyone wants their money back, this would actually force the bank to close, because your money isn't just locked up in a back room somewhere. It's being circulated through the economy through loans that are given out from that bank. But by everyone wanting their money back, this actually forced banks to close. And if a bank closed in 1873, everyone who had not gotten their money back would have lost everything. This is obviously no longer the case after the Great Depression hit in 1929, and we'll talk about that later on. So as a result of this economic downturn, we see a large new group of people living in debt, this new debtor class. And particularly we see a large group of debtors living working as farmers. And so one way to push for some ease to pay off your debt is through inflation. This new debtor class is looking for the U.S. government to print more paper money, to get more paper money in circulation. This is called soft money. They want inflationary tactics, because if there is more money in circulation, there's more money available and it's easier to pay off your debt. But that money that you're paying your debt off with is not as valuable as a more hard money tactic. Hard money is focusing on gold. Now, obviously, people who want hard money, these are the people who have made those loans. I don't want to receive a loan back I don't want to receive money back for a loan that I'd given out, several years before with depreciated currency. I want my money paid back in solid gold. So here is Grant and the federal government stuck between a rock and a hard place. Do they side with the soft money advocates who want inflation and greenbacks, or do they side with hard money advocates who want gold? Well, in 1875, they sided with those hard money advocates, passing the Resumption Act. Basically what this did, the federal government withdrew lots and lots of greenbacks from the economy, promising to pay it at full face value for gold. This draws in greenbacks out of the economy. They then turn around and burn it, but it reduces the amount of greenbacks in circulation. It is a contraction or a deflation of the economy, which only hurts those who have a lot of debt even more. So that debtor class is like, okay, the greenbacks didn't really work. So now they start focusing their inflationary tactic on silver. Silver had been dropped as a form of currency by the Treasury Department in 1873. But now that new silver mines were popping up all over out west, and because the greenback movement had really not worked so well, soft money advocates started saying, we want a return of the dollar of our daddies, of the silver dollar, because number one, it would help with inflation, and thus it'd be easier to pay off their debt, because silver is not obviously as valuable as gold, but it would also create jobs out west, which is where a lot of these debtors lived, because now there are silver mines to go and work for. So the end result, and we're by no means done talking about gold and silver during this time, but as a result of this Resumption Act, the Depression actually worsened. People were drawn even more in, but the U.S. credit rating actually improved. We looked better in the face of the rest of the world. But in the end, a lot of Republicans lost their positions of power in the House because these debtors refused to elect them back into Congress.